some of the DSPT In-Depth staffing and training session. So if I go on to the next slide. A couple of technical issues before we start properly. So this webinar is for adult social care providers. We do every now and then. A couple of people have asked us why we always say that. Sometimes you get GPs, etc. on there. If you are not an adult social care provider, you can be CQC or non-CQC registered, by the way. But if you're not an adult social care provider, I'd advise you to look for something that's aimed at GPs or optometrists or so on. All of you are on mute on Zoom and you can't be seen, so don't worry. If you're having your lunch or it's a bit of a busy day behind you, don't worry, nobody can see. If you are going to ask questions, please use the Q&A function. It just records all of the questions that are on there. And if you're not sure how to access that, if you're on a laptop or kind of PC or MacBook, you probably have it at the bottom, or you might have to bring your mouse up to the top. If you're on a phone or a tablet, you might have to tap on the screen, and then if you hit more and then Q&A, it will give you the ability to ask us some questions in there, and we'll get to those a little bit later. Anything obviously that we can't answer, we know a lot about this subject, but not everything, certainly definitely not everything. We will come back to you on those things. If you can add your email in on your Q&A, we'll be able to come back to you about it. The webinar won't last an hour. Usually get things done a little bit quicker than that, but we usually put an hour in just so that we've got the time. Hopefully we'll be able to give you a bit of time back today. And you will get access to the recording and the presentations, including all of the links that you'll see throughout the presentation afterwards. So as Martha said, a bit about today's agenda. We've got a little bit about Digital Care Hub, who we are, our Better Security, Better Care program. You may already know some of this, so it's a bit light touch. Again, the same with the Data Security Protection Toolkit. Most of you, I think it was, there was only one who maybe wasn't registered or had put unsure. We'll just cover the basics of that. And then we'll look at the organisational roles and a real deep dive into that staffing and roles section of the DSPT to try and figure out, okay, what should we have in there? What are the questions going to ask us? What do some of these things actually mean? So to quickly cover Digital Care Hub, I won't read everything off the slides, by the way, so please do feel comfortable in that one. So we are a nationwide support programme. Everything we do is completely free. There's no commercial offering, there's no cost to any of it. It's all funded by the Department of Health and Social Care, and we have a separate programme that's funded by the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. We're part of what used to be called digital social care, so by providers for providers, and we work with all of the major trade associations that are part of the Care Provider Alliance and care associations up and down the country. You'll also find a little link there afterwards and on our website for local support organisations. So these are 28 predominantly care associations or partners in care type organisations that exist in your area, and each one has a set of local authorities they cover. And they're fully funded again by ourselves just to be able to provide some of that support. And they're all trained on how to support you with the Data Security Protection Toolkit. So what is the Data Security Protection Toolkit? Again, it's a self-assessment. Most of you are probably aware of this. It's aimed at adult social care providers. The specific sort of version we have, GPs, hospital trusts, etc., have their own version. There's a lot of crossover in the questions, but there are some things that are specific to us. Again, it's totally free, and it mostly focuses on what we've got in terms of policies and procedures and training, as well as asking some of those basic questions. And it's not marked. Nobody's going to come back and say you failed your assessment because you didn't put the right thing in. Really, it's a self-assessment to give us these questions to say, I didn't think about this, or we really should do that more often. It's a tool for us as adult social care providers to be able to help ourselves. Again, it's about all information. So even though it's called Data Security Protection Toolkit, it includes paper records as well as those that are held digitally. I think that pretty much covers everything. Oh, the other thing is, yeah, it's a prerequisite for most of the digital technologies that are out there. So if we're looking at things like GP Connect, which a lot of the digital social care record providers are now started to integrate, things like NHS Mail, they all have a requirement. And as shared care records begin to be rolled out in different areas, the vast majority are requiring DSPT. We also know that local authorities are increasingly beginning to ask for DSPT to be in place and renewed every year as part of the contract monitoring process. We also know that CQC have now included it in their inspection framework. And for local authorities, particularly if you're talking to a commissioner, they work to what's called the What Good Looks Like framework, which also includes the DSPT. So from every angle, pretty much everyone is now, without necessarily saying it's a hard requirement, everyone's now recommending this as best practice. This is the way we should be doing things. And it sets us on the same standards as all of those NHS organisations who are going to be, give or take, filling in the same types of questions and ultimately coming to the same answers. So to look at staffing and roles, again, there's going to be a lot of text on these slides, and some of that is for you, of course, to go away and have a little look at. But as you kind of open up your data security protection toolkit, if it's the first time signing up, it will ask you these as a question. If you've already got an account, if you go to the top where it says admin, there's a little drop-down menu. You can hit organization profile, and it will ask you then for these, what they call the key roles. So that's your Caldecott Guardian, your senior information risk owner, your information governance lead, or what we now call your data security and protection lead, and your data protection officer. Now, there's a few things to cover about which one of those are necessary, and there's a couple of slides about that a little bit later. But it will ask you for these things. Don't worry, you don't have to enter all of the detail. You don't have to enter all of the details. It's not expecting you to have an answer for each one of those, but if you do have someone, for example, who is appointed as a data protection officer, then fantastic, fill that person in. Again, it's not marked. Nobody's going to go away and say, you said your Caldecott Guardian was Stephen and it's actually Jane. There's really, this is for your records and so that you can keep it up to date year on year. So to cover the roles from a basic sort of point of view, and I'll actually work on them backwards from where they are on the screen. Your data protection officer is the one who really looks at the legal side of things. So are we managing data in a way that's legally consistent? Are we actually obeying the laws that we should be obeying? So they'll focus on things like your GDPR legislation, for example, and kind of how we share information, how we store it, and so on. They're not really concerned about the risk to the organization. They're not really concerned about the ethics of it. They can be as a human being, but as a role, that's not their job. Whereas your data security and protection lead, or what we used to call your IG lead, they're more concerned with the overall ownership. Now, obviously, in a smaller organization, and we saw it in the polls that are more single site, well, a split mix of single sites and multi-sites. In a smaller site, that may well be the registered manager, it may well be the owner. It will be somebody senior enough to be able to say, yes, I own the responsibility for this. Which you might then say, okay, well, how does that then differ between your senior information risk owner? Well, the risk owner quite literally owns the risk. So they're not concerned with the legality of it. They're not concerned with the ethics. They're not concerned with owning all of the responsibility. They're just there to say, if we were to do X, Y, Z, this could be quite risky for us. So for example, if you're lots of you will have installed or purchased in a data. Am I losing my word on that? A digital social care record. The CSIRO really would be looking at just what's the risk for the organization. If we introduce something, what's the risk? How do the staff feel about it? How do we roll out a new technology? What are the risks if this doesn't go well? And how do you manage some of that data and what's the risk of holding all that data in one place? They wouldn't be concerned about the kind of legality of all of it, which would fall with your DPO. And then your Caldecott Guardian really is your person who uses the 8 Caldecott Guardian principles, which again, the NHS kind of follow and mirror along with ourselves to really look at the ethics of it. So yes, there could be risk involved. Yes, it's legal, but what's the ethics? Just because something's legal doesn't mean it's something we should be doing with our service users' data or with our staff's data or whatever it might be. Hopefully that gives you a decent overview of the 4 roles that it will ask for. The note that I've put in there is that we do also have a social care Caldecott Guardian learning network, which is a little bit long, but basically it's just a group of people who are Caldecott Guardians who work in social care. And we're trying to figure out what support we need. It's a role that's been around in the NHS for a very long time, but not very long in adult social care. So the more we can kind of come together, and again, it's a totally free network. There's no cost to join. It's just something that Digital Care Hub decided to run because it seemed like an obvious need. So to go on to when you do and don't require some of these things, it can be quite complex is probably the best way to explain it. We'd obviously always encourage consult with a professional, particularly data protection specialist, if you're really concerned about some of these things. But we know from the legislation that's out there with GDPR, you must appoint a DPO if you're a public authority. So, for example, if you're an adult social care provider that's owned by the local authority, or if you're, for some other reason, part of a public authority. Um, and this is quite a wibbly-wobbly definition. The second one is if your core activities include a large-scale, regular, and systematic monitoring of individuals, so for example, online behaviour tracking, those definitions from the National Data Guardian are quite vague for a reason, because it's up to you to be able to use your judgment to decide, okay, are we actually processing so much data that it becomes a legal problem for us and becomes a bit of a liability. Or if your core activities kind of include large-scale processing of special categories of data. So, for example, health data. A lot of ours actually will include some level of health data, especially as we begin to share data back and forward with the NHS. I think we'll probably get to the point where the blending of the difference between health data and social care data actually becomes almost one and the same. And so eventually we probably all will require a data protection officer. And if you don't have one appointed and you haven't looked at some training for someone, I would strongly recommend it at the moment. And taking a little look at, actually, I'm going to go back to that one just for a second. Just to talk about some of the others. I think we pulled out the DPO as a kind of specialist role. For a Caldecott Guardian, if you have service users who are publicly funded, then you are required to have a Caldecott Guardian. Otherwise, it's optional. And the same for your senior information risk officer as well. So if you've got service users that are publicly funded, you are supposed to have someone there who's essentially gone through the right level of training and has been appointed to that role. I should say for these roles, they're not, it's not a singular role. It's not like appointing someone to be a registered manager. It is just another hat that somebody else in the organization can wear.
Dan, before
Go
we
on.
jump into the questions of the DSPT, someone asked, I think you kind of answered a little bit, but can someone hold a hat for more than one of these roles, or is there a conflict of interest?
It's a really interesting question, because I don't think there's anything out there, but certainly when we did some training around this, there isn't anything out there to specifically say, yes, there is a full conflict of interest. You must not have the same, for example, your Caldecott Guardian can't be the same as your data protection officer. There's nothing out there to say that isn't the case. However, I think there probably is an argument to say, especially if you're a slightly larger organization, you should have somebody with a different hat on. Precisely, as you say in the chat, I would argue it's probably quite difficult, especially if you're wearing, let's say, if you're the data security protection lead who has the overall ownership, but you're also the Caldecott Guardian. It's quite difficult then to argue against yourself if you're kind of
Yes.
pro bringing in a new technology.
We have
Becomes quite
different
difficult.
purposes. The roles have different purposes and roles, so it'll be difficult for some of them to be the same person because they'll be arguing against each other.
Yeah. In a very small organization, you may well want to have people who've got different hats, but it's much like you would get with any kind of charity trustees meeting or board meeting. Just be clear where you're delineating. If you are sharing those roles, be clear which of those roles you're representing in that particular conversation. Okay, so looking at some of the questions then. So there's 8 questions in the staffing and roles section of the DSPT. Some are more difficult than others, and that's true for pretty much everything throughout the DSPT. 7 of those are mandatory for you to be able to publish your DSPT at standards met. The one that isn't mandatory is, you'll see on the screen, hopefully 3.3.1, which is provide details of any specialist data and security training that you've undertaken. So it's not mandatory. Unfortunately, there are no extra points if you fill that one in, but it could be quite useful to fill that one in year on year, especially if you've found a particular type of training which you think is valuable, or you've said, well, actually, this one made the most sense to us. It means that next year you can go back into that question and say, yeah, that was the training we did. You don't need to have it recorded elsewhere, although I imagine if you've got some sort of training database, then you probably will have that in there, especially if you're using an LMS or something similar. So it should say learning management system. So I'm using too many acronyms. Um, the other important thing to say, and we'll go into this as we click through the questions, is there's so much more support out there than just these questions. Each of the questions does have a link in there, which will go back to some further guidance and some videos that have been produced by the Institute for Public Care. And we'll cover some of the questions now. So just let you process that one for a second. So there's some of the obvious stuff. There's a question at the top in bold. There's a tooltip, which again, it's not there to trip you or trick you or trip you up, is what I was trying to say. It's just there to give you the best practice advice. Here's what you should know and know to be able to answer this question. The top box is for you to be able to answer your question. And then the bottom box isn't actually to do with the question itself necessarily, but it's useful for you to be able to leave some notes in. Particularly if you have multiple colleagues who you might have assigned different roles or said, well, we'll split this between us. And what it is actually really useful for if you're someone who has, like most of adult social care at the moment, high staff turnover, it's quite useful to get people to leave comments in that box because in a year or so, it might not be the same person filling this in. Really useful to leave them some tips. And you'll see at the bottom there, there's a little blue link that links off to Digital Care Hub website where you'll be able to access the kind of further guidance about this question. A couple of others, this one in particular has a link off to the Data Protection Officer and the Calder Guardian roles, but other questions will obviously have different links in there. Now you have a bit of an idea of the questions. Let's literally go through them in depth. So 1.1.5 asks us, who has responsibility for data security protection and how is this responsibility being formally assigned? So obviously the first thing is, well, who has responsibility? That's going to depend on your organization. If you're a multi-site organization with quite a lot of staff, there may actually be someone in a more sort of corporate role, for lack of a better term, or a head office role. If you're someone who is in a much smaller organization, even if it's a small multi-site organization, it may well be the registered manager. It may well be, if you have a chief exec, it may well be the chief exec, or maybe someone else who's decided that they're best placed to wear that hat. I don't think there's a particular recommended role. Obviously, you want someone senior so that they can actually take responsibility and act upon it. They can actually action some of the things that they'll be able to flag, or that other people flag to them. But overall, that's at least how you would name the person. See, you might put it, for example, you can answer it in multiple ways. Actually, you could put the job title in there. You could put the person in there. You could put the person with the job title. We've actually put a little note at the bottom just around it sometimes might be better to record the job title just so that when you do have some turnover, if that person does leave or retires, you at least know that was the job role that was assigned to it. Again, if you're a smaller organization, that might not be possible. It might just well be that you have to make a decision on who the next best person is afterwards. And the important and probably the slightly more difficult version of this is the second half of the question, which is how is the responsibility being formally assigned? Which is where they pulled that little paragraph out, which essentially says it could be in a number of different ways. It doesn't have to be a sort of formal certificate that's on there. It could just be something that's part of the job description. It could be noted somewhere. It could even just be that you've gone through this as an email or as a meeting. As long as you've recorded this somewhere. And again, much like we think about CQC inspections, for example, if you've recorded this somewhere and you can present it as evidence, fantastic. What I would even recommend doing is in the little comment section, just make a note about, okay, yes, in the top one, here's how it was recorded, but make a little bit of a note about how you came to that decision or where that evidence is stored and so on. Just so that in the future, it makes your life a lot easier when you come back to this next year. Hopefully that first one makes sense. It's one of the slightly easier ones because essentially all it's asking us is who and how. But some of them do get a bit more difficult, not in terms of understanding the question, but just in terms of being able to answer some of the requirements. So next one goes into, does your organization have an induction process that covers data security protection and cyber security? This one sometimes can be a bit of a head scratcher. And again, it depends on your organization, depends what your induction process looks like. it's well worth it. I'm sure most of you do regularly reviewing your induction process, especially if you have high turnover. One of the things we've put there is everyone who has access to personal data, and it doesn't matter if that's a staff member, a trustee, a director, a volunteer, um, everyone from your registered manager, your chief exec, all the way down to someone who might run the reception at the front desk who just lets people in and out. They're still going to have access to people's data, and often because we're quite a people-focused sector, they're going to learn people's names. They're going to learn lots about people. They should, in their induction, have all of that information to be able to say, here's how I make good decisions about the people who we support and the data that they hold and the staff data as well. And that's probably the other important distinction to make is often people will come down and say, yeah, well, everyone who joins us as a carer gets this induction training and it includes everything it should. Well, fantastic, but what about your finance staff, your HR staff? It's easy to overlook because we are always concerned about our service users and all of the sensitive data that we hold about them. Don't forget about your staff while you're there. Obviously, it's good practice to keep records of it. And yeah, as I said, regularly review that process. And again, all of this stuff can be then used as evidence with CQC as well. If you're not sure about this and you're not sure what level of training staff should be doing, we noticed this one was a bit of a painful question for people to be able to answer. So we developed two things. The first one, I'll go with them backwards again, is a manager's discussion tool. So if you've already got staff and you just need to be able to do a reminder with them, that manager's discussion tool just gives you a bit of a guide to sit down, usually in a supervision or a team meeting, and be able to say, okay, here's how we cover some of this stuff. Here's a reminder. Here's the talking points we need to hit. And there is also a partner discussion tool for that for your frontline staff as well. Second to that, there's an e-learning that we've developed. It's aimed at all staff, so it's completely agnostic of where the person sits in the organisation. We use examples from every single aspect of care, or at least all of those that we could get good representative sample for. It's totally free. It's available on our website. And if you have a learning management system, you can also get a downloadable version called the SCORM version that you can upload onto your learning management system as well. And again, that's totally free, all funded by Department of Health and Social Care. And there's also a link there to any further guidance. But those two, along with just making sure you're reviewing your induction processes and keeping records of them, that's enough to be able to answer that question. Say, yes, we do that. Don't worry. The next one is around employment contracts, particularly around what we call data security, which is 3 elements. And we often in adult social care focus on confidentiality, rightfully so, because of all the sensitive data we hold. What we often don't follow as much on is integrity and availability. And if you're not aware of those two, integrity is about making sure the data we hold is correct. Both just in terms of making sure the data we hold is correct for the purpose of holding it, but also in terms of the purpose of being able to use it and share it with other people. So, for example, if we're thinking about EMR and medication records, of course, we want to make sure all of that stuff is completely correct. And people then should and do, via GDPR, have the right to correct the record if any of that information is incorrect. And when it comes to availability, I'm just making sure that we don't withhold all of the information. The little sort of line on that that we always try and stick to is sometimes sharing information, even with sensitive information, is more important than holding that information for confidentiality reasons. Obviously, if it's in someone's interest for their healthcare, for example, or in terms of the personal care that we're delivering, and particularly talking about sharing it with our NHS partners as an example, or with the GP, it's really important that we share all the correct information. And again, we don't overshare, but we share the correct amount of information. So that should be in your contracts or your agreements. I think that might cover everyone. Oh, the other thing to cover there is not just frontline staff. So trustees, directors, as we say, receptionists, anyone who isn't frontline care should also have that in their contract. They'll still be dealing with sensitive information. It's really important they follow the correct data security standards. And if you're not sure, and that sounds a bit too much, we do have an example staff contract clause available on the website via that link. Again, totally free feel free to use it. The important thing is to probably say, don't just put it in the contract and not tell the staff. Let everyone know, cover it in your supervisions, cover it in a team meeting, let them know why it's in there. And it's probably quite a good opportunity to then review some of your induction and training processes while you're there if you don't already have that in. But essentially, this is a bit of a yes or no question. Do you have them in there or not? And once you put them in there, if you don't, then you can say, well, we've put them in now. Yes, we do. Just quickly check myself for time. Yep, we're okay. So has a training needs analysis covering data security, protection, and cybersecurity been completed? And importantly, it asks in the last 12 months. It did used to say since June, which we asked the Toolkit team to change, and they were very helpful in changing that. If you're not sure what a training needs analysis is, it's essentially looking at it's almost what it says on the tin. It's looking at your organization and saying, what sort of training do we need? What kind of analysis? Can we analyze our organization and figure out our training needs? And then obviously creating a development plan and going through with that training. It should be reviewed annually, the important thing. And this is where it fits back to some of those roles. It should be reviewed with the person who's got overall responsibility. So that data security protection lead should be the person who also looks at that and says, yeah, that's correct. We've got everything we need. Just to make sure that person who has overall responsibility is cited on the requirements. We've again built a bit of an example training needs analysis. You don't have to use any of these templates, by the way. You can use anything you want for your organization. But in case you don't have one, we've built these templates. And really, that's the main requirement there is just once every 12 months, just figure out what training needs you have. And I'm sure most of you do this, by the way. It's like anything we do with any type of compliance. You will do these things, but it's about being able to document them, have them in the right format, and be able to say, yes, I've done that. I'm sure if we all sit down and I asked some of you, do you try and work out what training you need? Probably all of you would say yes. If I said, do you all document it in a very specific type of document? Sometimes people often say, well, I don't do it that way. No, but I do it this way. It's just about having it in the right format. And this one is the one that was the most painful for the longest time for everyone, because it's such a high requirement, and it's to have at least 95% of your staff, directors, trustees and volunteers in your organization completed training on data security and protection and cybersecurity in the last 12 months. So that's quite a long sentence to work with, but essentially it's asking to 95% of everyone who works for you, who've got some sort of interaction with sensitive data, have they had the proper type of training on data security? And has it been done in the last 12 months? What we've also highlighted from some of the tooltips, it's about appropriate training for that person. We've definitely seen people going in both ways. Your registered manager, your chief exec, etc. Especially if you're working with much larger organizations, they should have a higher level of training than your frontline carer, for example, just because they're working with different levels and different scale of data. Yeah, this was extremely difficult one to hit. There wasn't really anything out there in the market apart from a few things that were aimed at the NHS. So we went away as a program and we decided to say, okay, we're just going to create something again completely for free, and it's e-learning that's based on that's on our website, and it essentially covers all of the requirements that you would need for the DSPT. Again, it's kind of goes through each of the roles, so it covers what frontline care will need, it covers what back office staff might need, senior leadership, and so on. It does include an assessment at the end, so you'll be able to distribute it amongst your staff or download it and use it on your learning management system, again for free. You will receive a dated certificate at the end, so you can get, say for example, if you have all staff doing it, they can send you all of their certificates at the end. You say, right, okay, we can at least keep a record then of who's completed it, and that's how you would get to that 95%. I might say 95% is a bit of a strange number. Why not go for a lower one or a higher one? The main reasoning behind that, at least from the Department of Health and Social Care, is that ideally they'd like 100% of people to have some sort of appropriate training based on their role. However, staff turnover, etc., is always a problem, sickness. So they went with the 95% amount. But again, just remember that's appropriate to their role. You know, your frontline care, it doesn't need the same training as your receptionist, for example. They would have slightly different needs based on the amount of data they hold. The other thing I should say is they pass the assessment if they get 80% or more. So again, it's not requiring you to get 100% of everything correct all the time. It is an 80% mark, and people can go back, relook at some of the slides and say, right, that's where I was wrong, and go back to the assessment and take it again. So it's not like they just kind of stuck to one assessment per year. We've got a link to the course there. I've got a link to a few more things about kind of how you access the right types of training. Because we're government funded, we don't sort of endorse any particular learning management system or any particular courses. But I'd strongly recommend just having a look at the market, figuring out, okay, what are some of our needs identified from our training analysis, and how do you make sure 95% of our staff are meeting those needs appropriate to their role? And how are we doing that annually? And I would just build that into your regular training review is, have we done our data protection learning this year? And again, I'm sure most of you do. You may not call it this and it may not cover all of the same things. And I can see a couple of people in chat have said they use slightly different platforms. And I'd probably recommend having a little look at our training, have a look at their training, and just cross-examine the two. So this is really a bit of a deep dive into the e-learning. So there are 4 modules, and you can see the 4 modules there. The first one covers data protection rights and responsibilities. Really importantly, it covers it not just from a frontline carer's point of view and an organizational point of view, but also from someone who's in receipt of care. The second one's about how we record and dispose of data. So again, key for particularly for frontline carers and for understanding how your organization deals with data operationally. Threats and security. So really looking at how do we keep our systems safe? You know, why should we keep our phone up to date? Those sorts of things it goes through with us, and how we can protect ourselves against frauds and scams, which are ultimately cyber attacks. And module 4 looks at data breaches, and it covers everything from the basics of what is a data breach, which is actually a much broader term than I think a lot of people sometimes realize, as well as those things we covered earlier around availability and integrity of data. And what we do if we receive the data in error, for example, or if we share it with the wrong person, and how we report those things, not just from a kind of frontline carer to manager level, but what you do as an organization. So that everyone's got that kind of level of knowledge. And again, I would send all of your staff on this. I'd tell them to access the link, or if you have a learning management system, email us at hello@digitalcarehub.co.uk, and we can send you the files to be able to upload it to your learning management system. It doesn't take very long, 15 minutes per module, and as long as you keep the tab open, it'll save the progress. As long as you don't clear all of your cookies, I should say. Yeah, and it's very scenario based is the best way to put it. I don't know if you've got any questions that you wanted to pick up, Marta.
Been answering them all,
looking
so
back. Oh, brilliant.
it's all good.
Fantastic. So for question 3.1, so this one asks us, this is the non-mandatory question that asks us to provide details of any specialist training. I would still fill it in, to be honest, because it is quite useful for you to be able to record that and look back on and use it as an evidence item with the commissioner or and so on. We don't provide any of the training for these specialist roles. But again, because we're publicly funded, we can't say this course or that course. We can say is look for accredited training providers. The important part of it all is look for people who can tailor their courses for adult social care in particular. There are lots of training providers out there, but particularly for some reason when they talk about data protection, they focus on the healthcare side of things. They're often people who've been supplying to the NHS, to GPs, surgeries, and so on for a very long time. They won't always be able to tailor some of their examples to adult social care. And in particular, I would say that's been true in the last few years of the Caldecott Guardian role. If you do send anyone on that training, just be sure to ask them, can you tailor everything for adult social care or not? Because it is a role that's existed with the NHS for a lot longer than adult social care. In terms of some of the training that's available, particularly for the Caldecott Guardian role, again, I'll just plug the called the Guardian Learning Network. And we are considering open some other networks for example, your data protection officer. Please email us if you're interested, or if you have staff who'd be interested in joining those learning networks. Again, they're totally free. Helps people with the professional development, helps us share good practice across the sector. And it helps you guys feedback to us that we can feed back to the Department of Health and Social Care to say, well, here's how this is working, how it isn't working, and so on. I'm looking at 3.4.1. So again, this one's mandatory again. Have the people with responsibility for data security and protection receive training suitable for their role? So again, quite similar to that 3.2.1, 95% question. Really, what it's looking for is the people who are responsible for that level of data security protection. So those roles that we identified earlier, your data protection officer, your call guardian, your CIRO, your IG lead, have these people had the right level of training? Again, we do recommend you do your training needs analysis first, identify that additional training needed, and particular pull out those 4 roles and say, if we're going to have those roles, what training should these people go on? What's the specialist training that's available? And again, not to repeat myself too much, but just make sure it's tailored for adult social care and it's not just a generic training. I'm sure those would be suitable to answer the question, but in order to help yourself best and make sure that you've equipped your staff with the right skills, see if you can get it tailored for our sector.
Dan, we just had a question on if it's possible to have any recommendations for training providers for DPO, CIROs, and Caldecott Guardians training.
So unfortunately, we can't, because we're publicly funded, we can't say go to this or this or this. What the only thing we can say is if you find someone that's accredited, preferably CPD accredited, as a training provider, seek them out. What I would always recommend is see if you can see a sample of their training, ask who's been on their training, who they regularly deliver to, and especially if you can get them to tailor it to adult social care. What I would also recommend is if you have a local care association or you have a local providers, partners in care organization, they may or may not have a list of the local training providers who provide that sort of training, but we can't endorse any particular one course or not, unfortunately. But I would recommend just have a really good look at the market and just make sure that what you're purchasing is accredited and it is from a respected training provider. This one's quite an easy one, I imagine. It's more the how you do this that can be quite difficult. So this is about, do you have an up-to-date record of staff and volunteers and their roles? I would actually extend that as well and say things like trustees, directors. I'm sure you all have a list of your service users as well, what the particular needs are. Really, I'm sure most of you have the list in some format or other. It's about how you keep that list up to date. That's the kind of key part here. What you don't want to end up in a situation where you've got 5 or 6 different lists of staff and you're trying to kind of maintain them all. What we would probably say is through your policies and procedures, or if you have a digital way of doing this, link it to your existing payroll system or your rostering system. Those are probably the 2 best ways to link this. I would assume your payroll system might be the best one, and keep a separate list for volunteers, trustees, directors, etc. Anyone who isn't kind of done through the normal payroll system. It just makes it so much easier to track people who've started, people who've left. And what this also then allows you to do, and part of the reason it asks you this question now, is further in the DSPT, it will talk about devices, and I would link the 2 as well. I would look at, okay, what are the staff that we've got? Which devices do they use? Which logins do they have for which types of software? And then you're able to then revoke some of that access if that person leaves, or where someone starts. You can kind of do a proper audit and say, okay, what should this person have access to based on their role? As I say, that's the hard part is how you keep that up to date, and definitely link it to something that exists rather than kind of creating more work for yourself just for the sake of answering a question. I would link it to something else personally. Apart from that, I think that's a relatively easy one to cover. And that really, I think, covers all of the 8 questions. I know we've covered a lot of the questions in the chat as well. but I don't know if there was anything else that was in there, Marta.
No, let me check. Um,
I can see a couple of people had said they'd be interested in the data protection networks. Yeah, please definitely email us at
yes.
hello@digitalcarehub.co.uk. We are interested in having people involved. I think the current, God, I might get the numbers wrong here live on a webinar, but I think the current Colleague Guardian network has something like 50 something members.
More,
And it's,
more.
oh yeah,
We
there's more. Okay,
for the
brilliant.
next one we have so far 87 people.
Fantastic. Yeah, so it is,
So
it
yeah.
is very quickly growing. Um, Mainly because that's a new role, because so many people are
Yeah.
publicly funded. Um, they know that they need a Cultic Guardian in place, and so it's about and you find a nice mix of people on those calls. I think there's some people who've
Yeah.
kind of come from the NHS into adult social care and have said, okay, I know how to do this from a health point of view. Let's try and translate this to social care. And some people who've come on the call and said, oh God, I've just been told I'm the Caldecott Guardian for our organisation. Where do I find all the right information? And we can point toward the Caldecott Guardian Council. We regularly, I think in the next one or the one after, we've got someone from the Caldecott Guardian Council coming to speak. With regularly feeding back information to them so that they have to have an idea.
Yeah.
I see someone's also just asked, do I have to be a Caldecott Guardian to join the network? No, not necessarily. I mean, it is supposed to be there to be able to share information, but no, definitely not. If you're someone at a DPO or a CSIRO, you'd be definitely welcome. And what I suspect we will end up doing is creating either a network where you can be together or perhaps a 4 or 5 different networks, depending on the amount of people we get. And I saw someone else has asked, can we customize the e-learning resources to our organization's learning platform? I don't think it allows you to customize it just because the content itself is set. I think I'm right in that one, Marta. I,
Yes. You can't really customize it, but you can add it to your LMS platform. So we can send you the SCORM files and you can get these added to your learning platform, provided it's compatible, which it should be. So yes, if you email us at, I'll put it in the chat, help@digitalcarehub.co.uk, we can send you the SCORM files, and you'll be able to download those and get them on your training platform.
yeah, I think the advantage of doing it that way is that at least it's on your training platform. Your staff are probably quite used to using your specific training platform. And you could, I'm sure you've got information that will come back from that to say this many people have completed it, or you can at least um, have a more integrated way of doing it alongside all of your other mandatory training that you'll have, I'm sure. Um, if not, you can still use it on the website and they can still generate a certificate that they can send to you. And I know people kind of mix and match as they please.
Yeah. Someone said in the Q&A that trying to train 95% of staff is the issue. It's hard to get to 95%.
Yes, very hard. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the most difficult question in the entire toolkit, honestly. It's one of the reasons we sat down to develop the e-learning because God, it was incredibly difficult to meet. It was one of the really upfront conversations we had with DHSC was this it's incredibly difficult to meet, and realistically, people need a couple of different types of training to do it before we develop the e-learning. Now the e-learning does the job. It's just about the difficult part of how do I get 95% of my staff to have done it. Um, Again, I would use a bit of a mix and match of both the e-learning and the manager's discussion tool. If you have people who've already been through it in the last 12
Yeah.
months, I'd probably recommend just getting them, via supervision or any other types of team meeting you have, get them to sit down, go through the manager's discussion toolkit. It'll take 10 minutes, if that. And it's well worth doing because then you've hit that 95%. And you can be sure, both personally and professionally, that actually we've done everything we can to make sure we're keeping everyone's data safe.
Yeah. What I said earlier is like you can use the e-learning as that sort of like initial training. Um, and then you can use the manager discussion tool to keep going as a continuation of that, to assess the knowledge and the training of your staff members. And that can be as regular as you want. Any other questions? given we've got about just over 10 minutes. Any more?
Someone's made a really interesting
Oh,
observation there. Yeah, thank you for sharing that one. So someone said ultimately they've said, and I guess it is ultimately they've suspended staff who don't complete any mandatory training, but usually the carrot approach works without needing to resort to that. So yeah, it is often about how you incentivize people to complete. And it's not easy, I don't think we'd ever pretend it's an easy thing to do. We have enough things to be able to get on with in adult social care. But this
mm,
is one of those really important, really integral things, especially as we digitize and we share information with everyone. We
yes.
probably do hold the most vulnerable data. Sorry, the data that's about the most vulnerable people in our society. It is something that we should be taking seriously and should be trying to put at the top of the importance list.
Um, okay, well, I'm gonna just launch one last poll just so you can give us your feedback on today's session. And uh just let us know how we've done really. I've popped in the chat the link to our events page in case you want to sign up to any more webinars. We have some really exciting cyber webinars coming up next month. They're not published yet, but they will be published by the end of today. And this will be working through cyber attack scenarios tailored to social care. So if you keep an eye on it, we'll be publishing them end of today. Oh, hi, Angie. I can see you in the chat.
Yeah, just while you're filling out your polling questions, guys, Angie from one of our local support organisations in Oxfordshire has said you can utilise your staff to help get the training provided. Someone she was supporting with the DSPT trained a section of the staff as cyber champions, which then I assume then they work with everyone else to get everyone else trained up as well. That's a really good way of doing it, I think.
Yeah.
We'll give you a couple
Okay.
more
Yeah.
seconds to complete the poll, and then we'll give you nearly 10 minutes of your life back, hopefully. Have a nice cup of tea, hopefully.
Okay. Well, most of you said increase your confidence this webinar, which is really nice to hear. Most of you are likely or very likely to complete the DSPT. That's really good. And you would recommend this webinar, which is great. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. As I said, I put the link in the chat to our events page for any further webinars. We'll be launching new webinars end of today, tomorrow, this week. So please have a look. And any other questions, you can reach us at help@digitalcarehub.co.uk. And we'll be sending you the slides and the recording of this webinar. So thank you all, and I hope you have a lovely day.
Thanks,
Thanks.
guys.
Bye.